Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are diving deep into something really fascinating. We're going to unpack the narrative mechanics, the nuts and bolts, really, of a classic children's fable called A Little Boy's Goat. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, it's just a simple story. But actually, fables are highly efficient systems. They're basically engineered to teach, entertain, and completely lock information into our brains. So today, we're going to look specifically at how the core engine of this story functions to create a super memorable lesson. To get our gears turning right off the bat, I want you to imagine this. If someone you love is upset, what do you actually do to help them? Let's make it specific. Imagine you're walking through a forest, right? And you see a little boy crying because his pet goat ran away. Who do you think would be the best equipped to help him out? A fast rabbit, a clever fox, or a tiny little bee? Think about your immediate gut reaction regarding size, strength, and capability. This question brilliantly primes us for the unexpected systemic resolution we're going to explore today. So, lock in your answer. All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the missing goat. So, let's look at how this whole primary conflict gets established. It's our inciting incident. We've got a little boy with a goat. Simple enough, right? Well, the goat runs off into the woods because he spots some tasty-looking grass. The boy wants to head home, but this goat is incredibly stubborn and just flat out refuses to budge. The boy quickly realizes his own physical limitations here. He literally cannot force this goat to move. So what happens when that initial system breaks down? The boy starts to cry. And this emotional reaction is the catalyst for absolutely everything that follows. Moving on to Section 2, the chain of tears. Here's where the story introduces a classic narrative domino effect. It brings in a brand new element, a rabbit. The rabbit hops over and kicks off this repeating dialogue structure, asking, "Why do you cry, little boy?" The boy explains the goat won't go home. Now, the rabbit is super confident in its own abilities, so it says, "Do not cry, I can make the goat go home." But when the rabbit tries to chase the goat, that physical approach completely fails. The goat stays put. And you know what happens next? The rabbit starts crying too. This cycle of failure is officially beginning to loop. Let's zoom out and see how this actually builds across the narrative. It's fascinating how the story functions through this idea of compounding failure. Step 1, the boy cries. Step 2, the rabbit tries to chase the goat, totally fails, and cries. Step 3, a squirrel enters, asks the exact same question, tries the exact same method, fails, and, you guessed it, cries. Step 4, a fox shows up. Now, traditionally in fables, foxes are the clever, capable ones. But this fox attempts that exact same physical chase strategy, fails, and joins the crying party. The failure of each animal causes this spreading wave of sadness through the forest, building a sequence that is just incredibly easy for an early reader to predict and track. And this right here perfectly illustrates the mechanical genius of the fable format. When the fox asks the squirrel why it's crying, the story delivers this escalating chain directly to us. Just listen to the rhythm of this. I cry because the squirrel cries. The squirrel cries because the rabbit cries. The rabbit cries because the boy cries. The boy cries because the goat will not go home. It works backwards through the entire chain reaction. This isn't just repetition. It's a brilliant memory loop. By reiterating the cause and effect over and over again, the story completely locks the sequence of events into the reader's brain. Which brings us to Section 3, the unlikely hero. So, a narrative pattern built entirely on compounding failure eventually needs a disruption, right? Otherwise, we never reach a resolution. We've hit the peak of this failing chain reaction. We have the defeated, crying fox sitting with the squirrel, the rabbit, and the boy. They are completely out of options based on their current operating logic. But then, a tiny, confident bee flies by. The bee asks that same structural question, "Why do you cry, little fox?" And the fox repeats the entire chained loop of tears all over again. Now, when this little bee boldly steps up and says, "I can make the goat go home," our expectations are completely subverted. The fox actually laughs at the bee. He is in utter disbelief. He's like, "I cannot make the goat go home. How can a little bee make him go home?" And this really highlights a super common cognitive bias we all have, the assumption that a large problem automatically requires a physically large and strong solution. The fox represents the inventional thinking that has, up to this exact moment, completely and totally failed. So the crucial takeaway here is how the bee changes the underlying strategy. Think about it. The larger animals, the rabbit, the squirrel, the fox, they all utilized the exact same failing strategy of brute physical force. They tried to physically run after the goat to force it home. and that brute force just resulted in failure and tears. The bee, however, doesn't use physical force at all. It flies into the woods and simply says, buzz buzz. It uses leverage. It uses the goat's own instinctual fear of being stung. This is a completely different tactical approach, and it is highly effective. The goat immediately recognizes the consequence, saying, a bee can sting, I will run. Let's wrap it up with Section 4, the big difference. The pattern of failure has finally been disrupted. The goat runs away from the woods. The logic of the bee's action perfectly counteracts the goat's stubbornness. The chain of tears is officially broken. The problem is solved, and the little boy can finally go home. The system of the story reaches a satisfying equilibrium, and it concludes with the boy expressing this really simple, heartfelt gratitude. He just says, thank you, little bee. And this brings us to the core value, the real moral anchor of the entire narrative. It's explicitly stated in the text. Even the smallest help can make the biggest difference. The entire mechanism of the story, the large animals failing, the compounding sadness, the mocking fox, all of it was meticulously designed to make this single sentence land with absolute maximum impact. It proves that the value of an action isn't determined by the physical size of the actor, but by the effectiveness of the approach. Which leaves us with a final, incredibly important thought to wrap up today's explainer. How can you be a little bee in your own community today? You don't always need to be the biggest or the loudest or the strongest to solve a problem. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective, a small but targeted action, and the courage to step up even when others might laugh. I really want you to take that lesson with you today. Thanks so much for joining me to explore how the mechanics of this brilliant little story actually function. Keep learning, keep observing, and I will see you next time.